Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be doing an advanced Civilization 7 tutorial covering the topic of food and population growth. As you can see here, we are getting a total of plus 60 food from being the suzerain of city-states, but this actually isn't that valuable. It's worth the equivalent of maybe 1 to 2 specialists over the course of this entire age, and this is going to be the central thesis of the video that we are going to be doing today, which is that food is weak. It's kind of okay early on, but then it falls off in a logarithmic fashion. To explore this, we are going to be leaning on a modular spreadsheet, which we will be showing in just a second, and looking at the math and numbers and relationship between all these things in order to show just how bad food it really is. We're going to first cover how growth works, then we're going to talk about how bad it is, and then we are going to compare it to Civilization 6, which is much more linear in terms of the value of food, and food doesn't really fall off in value like it does in Civilization 7. Now, I have to ask you, if you have any children under the age of 38, please ask them to leave the room, because the spreadsheet that we are about to show is not for the eyes of the innocent. Welcome to the spreadsheet. So the first thing to note is when we are talking about population and the population required in order to determine how much food is required to grow a city, we are only referring to the population that is either working tiles or is specialists. In Civilization 7, every single time you build a building, this will add 1 population to the settlement, but this population from buildings does not count towards the food requirements required to trigger an additional marginal growth event. And so if you build 10 buildings in a size 1 settlement, it will become a size 11 settlement, but in terms of food requirements in order to make the settlement grow, it will still act as if it were merely a size 1 settlement. Let's take a look at the equation that is used to calculate how much food is required for population growth, and this equation, or at least the values you plug in, change from one age to another. So we have the food cost is going to equal the flat modifier, which changes for each age, plus the scalar modifier times x, where x is the number of previous growth events already occurred. So in the instance of a size 1 settlement, this will be 0, plus x raised to the exponent modifier for that age divided by 10. So if we take a look at antiquity, we will see that it will cost 30 food no matter what. That is our flat modifier, and if we have a size 1 settlement where not a single growth event has occurred, it will just be the 30 flat cost. Next we have the scalar modifier, which is going to be added in the antiquity age. It is quite low, it is just 3, which is going to be good for, kind of this middling growth range of this 2 to 5-ish range. Before the exponent really starts to kick in, and then we have the exponential modifier of 33, and so this means that this number, in terms of looking at the exponential modifier, it's going to be x raised to the 3.3. In order to account for the turns required to grow, the spreadsheet does need to predict how much food is going to be produced per turn, and we are doing that in several ways. So first of all, each city center does produce a little amount of food. This is captured in the equation. Second, we are predicting a sum number of flat food coming from buildings, and we have this in this 6, 12, and 18 predictors. I suspect at the start of the age, it will be considerably lower than this, and at the end of the age, it's likely to be higher. This is just kind of a leaping off point, but it might be a little bit different than these values. These are just the ones we've slot in, but if you think that you want to change them, you will be able to change them using the drop down here, and this will change the amount of flat food that is being gained. Next, off to the left, we have a series of assumptions that are being made, and you can change these assumptions. We have the amount of average food being produced per citizen. This is the specialists and the guys working tiles, but excluding buildings. And if you change these values, like let's say 14 food is being produced, you can see that this wildly changes the outputs of the spreadsheet. We have it here at 2. Next up, we have the specialist ratio. If you increase the number of specialists, this will increase food demand considerably and will result in there being a lower kind of overall growth, and this is accounted for. We also have the growth bonus. We have accounted for this as well. If you wanted to say stack stack a bunch of growth bonus and look at how things are different, we do have this. Notably, at the time of making this video, fish is bugged where it doesn't add extra bonus food towards growth, but instead, or effective food towards growth, but instead actually reduces the amount. So if you have 20 fish right now, you will grow every turn no matter what, and if you have 21, you won't grow at all. But we are not accounting for the fact that fish is bugged because we assume that it gets fixed. And also, we are accounting for a decreased specialist maintenance costs or bonuses to specialist maintenance costs. So if you have a lot of specialists, but you're stacking the modifier that reduces the cost, you will be rewarded for this, and you can simulate this in the spreadsheet as well here. A key difference between Civ 7 and Civ 6 is that on citizens working tiles, not specialists, there is no food maintenance. And so the biggest driving force for population growth, or the entire equation, is going to be this exponential modifier. And as if you take a look here at the cost to grow in terms of food, you can see that it goes up very, very, very quickly. If you are at a size 30, it goes up to 67,000. Functionally speaking, we've represented this in terms of the turns to grow. We do have a little bit of a color coding system. If the number is under 10 turns to grow, we have it as green. If it's under 20 turns to grow, we have it as yellow. If we're under 30 turns to grow, we have it as orange. Red is under 40 or under 50 turns to grow. And then functionally speaking, once you're over 50 turns to grow, if you're at the latter half of your age, you maybe have 0 to 1 additional growth remaining. And if you're at the front half, you maybe have 1 to 2, something like this. So functionally speaking, we can say that growth has really kind of stopped. And this is actually what drives population growth throughout ages, because you kind of hit a wall in the antiquity age, roughly speaking, with our given assumptions here, which again might not be the best assumptions. You could see if we change the amount of food, this would change where the wall is at, but you functionally will hit a wall way, way earlier, and then your growth basically kind of stops. And this is one of the ways in which you are kind of experiencing a soft reset via ages in some regards, because you get at a certain point, whether it's a 9 citizens or whether you expect to get more food per citizen and it's 12 citizens, you are going to hit a wall past which you functionally aren't going to pass. And it is only when you get to the next age and this exponential modifier decreases that you will, in some sort of sense, unlock more available pop growth to happen. It's easy to kind of feel like you're just having normal pop growth over time, and then you get into the next age and you have normal pop growth over time, but really the game is designed to kind of hit these population walls where you do not really experience growth. One of the reasons why we say food is really weak as a resource is because it can basically do nothing to cut through this wall whatsoever. We have here in this column the effect of additional marginal food. We can see it is going to affect all the different categories. This is feeding into all 3 of the ages for this value here, but this is the amount of extra food we are injecting to each settlement, and the output we are receiving here is the number of growth events we would get in 100 turns per X marginal food, where X is what we have slotted in here. So if we had 5 food, how many additional growth events we would get? We get a lot early on, and so it could be valuable to, when you first found a settlement, to buy any sort of warehouses that increase food, something like this. But then you see, by a population size of 8 in antiquity, even if we gave it 100 turns, we would not experience 1 additional marginal growth event as a result of having 5 food. This means that the inability to overcome the wall with marginal food, you can see it just gets 1 further if we double this. If we got 20 flat food, we would just get a couple of extra, growths possibly, or move this threshold where we need 100 turns in order to grow. And so this is not really a good means of breaking through the wall, no matter how much flat food you get. Really, just in order to break through this, you have to just go to the next age in order to decrease the exponent. And so this means that buildings like the garden, which produce 3 flat food and some additional foods, per adjacency, these are just almost never going to be worth the production and the gold cost unless you build them on a building or in a city that is 1 to 5 population, but you won't have that many cities that have really low population unless you have a settlement within which you buy like 5 buildings, and it still effectively has, for the purposes of pop growth, a size of 2, in which case the garden could be kind of okay, but then it falls off completely and you're still going to have to pay happiness and gold maintenance on it, while it is not going to allow you to grow at all. I think it's also important to frame and contextualize what the value of food is here, especially as we're thinking about how valuable is this 5 marginal food. We could choose to work a 5 food tile, let's say, and let's say that tile only gives us 5 food. Well, the value of food is being able to grow in order to have more citizens to work and get other yields. There's really not any other value for food other than a promise for additional eventual yields. And so, as a consequence of this, working just a food-only tile is almost never going to be good, because it's only going to be useful for the first maybe 20 or so turns that you have a settlement to really be working and pushing the food tiles specifically if there are no other yields attached, because after a certain point, even if it's a 5 food tile, which is quite a lot of food, over the course of 100 turns, you're not going to experience any growth events, and so that food will not be able to be transmuted into new yields, and you would have been better off just grabbing the yields that you were trying to grow in order to get with the food. And so it's important to really emphasize just how unvaluable food is as a result of the combination of this exponential modifier and the lack of a maintenance requirement on citizens that are working tiles. Now, it will be somewhat valuable as you get to the point of specialists in order to maintain some sort of equilibrium where you won't have negative growth as a result of having too many specialists. If your average food per citizen started to go down under 2 and you had a really high specialist ratio here, eventually your growth would stagnate or even become negative. And so to some extent, a flat food would be useful at that type of point where you're expecting no growth and you're only maintaining specialists. But that's a really weird scenario to find yourself in. And instead, it's going to be the case that, working really good food tiles or good food tiles, which might have been really, really strong in Civilization 6 because it would lead you to having a lot more growth events, it's just going to be functionally worth a lot less in Civilization 7 because it's not going to end up gaining you additional tiles or specialists to really expand a whole lot of yields. Okay, so let's compare Civilization 6 to Civilization 7 because a lot of people are going to be operating from a Civilization 6 paradigm, and seeing the difference I think can also really highlight just how big this exponential effect is in Civilization 7. So off to the far right here, we do have the cost of, in terms of food, of having a growth event in Civilization 6, and you can notice it is slightly exponential, but it is nowhere near as exponential as Civilization 7, and with the top end price of 400 versus that 67,000 figure, that is an enormous thing. And so you can always, if you get additional food, find a way to grow in Civilization 6. The main substantive difference in Civilization 6 is that all of your pops, not just specialists, will have a food requirement, which means as you approach only getting 2 food per pop on average, your growth will really, really slow down. As long as you can stay above that, you will continue to grow. And so what throttles you in Civ 6 is your ability to work tiles overall that yield positive food, or to get buildings that will be able to pull up your average food per pop, such that you can stay above this 2 figure in order to achieve and have reasonable growth. If we compare Civilization 6's growth using the average of growth across 3 ages here, we can see that at lower levels, you actually have faster growth in Civilization 7. A big part of this is that there is no maintenance, again, on the citizens, and also we are accounting for a whole lot of flat modifiers, right? In that we are getting more flat modifiers from the city center. We are accounting for 6, 12, and 18 that we are getting from buildings that don't count. They count towards population, but they don't count towards growth events. And overall, it's not that big a difference that we are going to have in the requirements of food in order to grow relative to Civilization 6. So the first few levels relative to Civilization 6, you will experience faster growth. But it very, very quickly, as you grow bigger, falls off as a result of this exponential increase until the point where the amount of growths you will be having is down at something like 5% of what you get, or we'll call it 10%. Functionally, you're just never going to grow into this range. Eventually, you just stall out. And so somewhere in this range, we are still achieving growth if we were playing Civilization 6, but in Civilization 7, you're just kind of hitting a bit of a wall. Unless you're in the modern age, you can grow up to this point kind of a little bit, but it is going to be very, very slow, whereas with Civilization 6, we can maintain growth for as long as we can find decent food yields, whether it is good tiles or other kind of bonuses from buildings or what have you. We can still get a little bit trade routes, this type of thing, but it is going to be rough for Civilization 7 because a marginal food is not going to be that valuable. If we take a look, the difference between marginal food's value between Civilization 6 and 7, we are taking and dividing this marginal food cost. We are dividing the average here on Civilization 7 by the amount of marginal value that we are achieving in Civilization 6. And you can see even at the lower levels, marginal just flat food is not anywhere near as valuable, and it falls off really, really, really fast. Where you think of, if you got a kind of big city, we'll call it a size 15 in Civ 6. And then maybe in terms of population, it's going to be a size 22 or something like this in Civilization 7, but remember that's only 15 growth events. If you are at this point, the value of the food you have, if you're used to playing Civilization 6, the value of getting something that's going to give you 3 food, it's going to be only 6% of the value it would have been in Civ 6. 6%. That's so incredibly low. And so as a result, like this, I think if you're used to playing Civ 6 and you just take a look at this, it's really, really, really highlights just how bad it is to just try and acquire marginal food, because you're basically going to get your growth events in Civilization 7, and then you're kind of stuck when you hit the wall. And so trying to exhibit any sorts of agency by acquiring more food is just generally not going to be effective as a result of the math of the exponent. Now, there is a fair objection here, which is that, okay, you're saying that food is way, way, way better in Civilization 6 than it is in Civilization 7, but it's also a lot harder to get. Here I am building these buildings that are giving me 20 food or something like this, and that's fair enough. Even if we decrease this to just 40% of the value, it still falls off quite quickly, and it's going to become significantly less valuable. So if we have a size 15 settlement, we'll call it a size 10 population in Civ 6, or 15 population in Civ 7, where we have 5 buildings, something like this. When you're thinking about how valuable is this additional food, it's going to have roughly 1/6 the value it would have in Civilization 6. That's still incredibly low. And so this is, I think, for those of you who are coming from Civ 6, I hope a bit highlighting just how weak food is as a yield to try and pursue. And the point at which it's strong is the point at which you are very unlikely to have a construction queue unless you just buy 10, or unless you buy 6 buildings in a settlement and upgrade it to a city immediately. You are not going to be in this range where you can think about building a building like the garden, which gives you a flat food yield, and still have that actually be useful. By the time you can build food buildings, food will just be too weak already, and you just generally aren't going to want to do it, and the gold required to maintain the building is going to likely be worth more than the food. So even if you could get the building for free, you probably still would not want to have it. So that's the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, but also share, especially because I'm trying to break into Civilization 7 to some degree on the channel, primarily a Victoria 3 player here, and so any shares, especially in Civilization type of groups and forums and this type of stuff, would be greatly appreciated. Other than that, have a good day.